Hey everyone, this is Mike, and today I wanted to talk about Summoner, kind of give my opinion on the job, talk about some of the mechanics of the job itself as well, some of the clunkiness behind it, some of the stuff that is kind of like leftover spaghetti from Stormblood as well, because I do think there is some stuff that they could have changed going into Shadowbringers, but maybe they'll do that going into 6.0, who knows. Of course, this is all my opinion, so if you have something different opinion, something else that you want to add to what I'm going to be talking about, then feel free to leave a comment in the comment section down below. So, first of all, Summoner, do I like it, yes or no? Yes, I like it a lot. Currently, Summoner is a job that feels really good to play, even though there are a lot of clunky things about it, but when you kind of get used to the clunkiness of the job, it is rewarding to play as well, because whenever you execute those clunky mechanics correctly, you basically get rewarded with a lot of DPS. Currently, the DPS standing in between the casters, I talked about this 2 days ago as well, Summoner is almost at the same level as Black Mage, and Red Mage is kind of coming closer to Summoner now, but it's really still not there. And Black Mage is only barely above Summoner, so right now Summoner is a really good job when it comes down to dealing damage, and you still have a Resurrection as a backup if you really needed to. So Summoner, really strong job at the moment to play, but it's also really cool to play as well because of how it feels. Back in Stormblood I used to play Summoner a fair bit back in the days of Deltascape, and then a little bit into going into UCOP as well. The first few weeks I played Summoner for that too. But back then, Summoner didn't feel like a Summoner. You did have, of course, your pet that you were using, and you had your Bahamut summon, but basically most people would just put Ifrit on Sick, to which the term Siegfried came to be, and you didn't really feel like you were a Summoner until you hit that Bahamut summon, and then all of a sudden, okay, I have this big boy following me around, and I have to do certain things, use all of those off-global cooldowns to make Bahamut use his auto attacks and that kind of stuff. And then you felt like a Summoner, but that was only like 20 seconds out of a 2-minute rotation, whereas right now, every 1 minute you're gonna have a Demi-summon out, and then in between those two Demi-summons, you're still going to be commanding your pet through the use of Eggy Assaults, and the Eggy Assaults themselves are also very rewarding to use because they give you that Ruin 4 stack as well, that you can get to get some extra movement, more weaving, and also just bonus damage, because Ruin 4 is your strongest GCD if we're looking at all of the different Ruin skills that we have access to, which is Ruin 2, 3, and 4. And if you're able to map everything out perfectly, you can kinda minimize the Ruin 2 usage completely. I think the only fight where I still use it is E8 Savage, and that is because I've only done a few pulls on that fight. So it's really cool to kinda make it all flow together, and it works really well together as well. Now, the thing where Summoner gets a little bit clunky is when we're talking about the pets, because the problem with pets in this game is that you have to basically give them commands to attack, but the pet themselves is also doing its own auto attacks. So, for example, say I use an Eggy Assault, then the pet finishes its auto attack, and then it does the Eggy Assault on top. But what happens is, if you use an Eggy Assault and then immediately summon Bahamut, for example, then you'll still lose the usage of the Eggy Assault. You'll also have used the GCD to basically command the Eggy Assault, but you won't get damage, or you won't get the Ruin 4 stack because your pet didn't have the chance to execute the Eggy Assault before you basically made it transform into Bahamut. So that's kind of a little bit clunky what is there. On the other hand, I also don't really see how they could fix this, because just how the job works, like mechanically, and it's also a really easy fix for the player itself. You can just use an Eggy Assault, then take a filler GCD, which usually is like a Ruin 4 or something like that, and then go into your Demi-summon. That kind of fixes that problem. But it is something that you do need to know as a player. There's also some other two things, mainly looking at the big summons, the Demi-summons, that are a bit clunky as well. Looking at Phoenix, you need to triple weave at the moment to go into Phoenix to not lose auto attacks. This is mainly, or at least people think, that this is because of the regen effect that the Phoenix gives when you summon it. So so Phoenix is already doing an animation or doing a action when you summon it, so it doesn't immediately have the time to follow up with an auto attack. An easy fix for that, at least I think, would be to give that regen effect to the player. So when the player uses Phoenix, the regen effect comes from the player and not from the Phoenix itself, so that your Phoenix basically isn't animation locked when you summon it. That's the only thing that I really have to say that is bad about summoning Phoenix, because outside of that, the Fireburst trance and the Phoenix summon itself feels really good, because you're using that Fountain of Fire and Fountain something else with Flame. I forget the second name always. But it feels really good because you still have that Enkindle, you have those two like GCD actions that are specific to your Phoenix as well, making it feel like a very, how should I say this, like a very involved summon, I guess you could say, especially when you compare it against Bahamut, because Bahamut only really has the Akmorn that you enkindle and the rest just comes from your own personal GCDs. Now, the reason why Bahamut is different than the Phoenix summon, and I hope this is something that they could change going into 6.0 or later down the line in this expansion maybe, although I don't really see them changing Summoner that much this expansion anymore, because it is already a pretty good feeling job. But the way Bahamut works right now is basically because of leftover spaghetti code from Stormblood, because back in Stormblood, every time you used your Dreadwyrm trance, you would get 1 stack of Dreadwyrm Aether, meaning you had to execute your Dreadwyrm trance twice in order to summon Bahamut once. Now at level 72 in Shadowbringers, they gave you a new trait that when you go outside of Dreadwyrm trance, you now get 2 stacks of Dreadwyrm Aether, meaning that you only need 1 Dreadwyrm trance in order to be able to summon your Bahamut. The reason why they did this is because now your 2-minute rotation, instead of being 2 Dreadwyrm trances, 1 Bahamut, is now a Dreadwyrm trance, a Bahamut, a Fireburst trance together with Phoenix. So it all makes sense. Now, the issue that I have with this is that your Dreadwyrm trance currently serves no purpose other than just using a Death Flare and being able to summon your Bahamut. Because being inside Dreadwyrm trance does not grant you anything other than just instant casts basically, because it gives you that 2.5 second GCD reduction. So basically everything that is not a resurrection will be an instant cast inside the Dreadwyrm trance. So outside of just using it to get the reset on Tri-Disaster, the Death Flare, and then being able to summon your Bahamut, you don't necessarily spend time in Dreadwyrm trance at all, I feel like this tier, or just in general at all, because there's no real use to being in it. Back in Stormblood it gave you damage up, but right now you don't get any damage from being inside Dreadwyrm trance, so I hope that they kind of change it a little bit to be more of something that you would want to use more, so to speak. Because right now, immediately after Dreadwyrm trance, immediately after you've done the stuff inside Dreadwyrm trance that you want to do, which is maybe use some leftover Eggy Assaults, use your Enkindle for your pet or something like that, you're immediately gonna exit out of it to go into Bahamut. And then Bahamut itself also doesn't feel as involved as Phoenix, because with Phoenix you have those 2 GCDs, like the Fountain of Fire and the other one, that you basically like spend on the Phoenix itself. Bahamut just does its auto attacks with your own GCDs, meaning that the only thing that you really feel like you're doing together with Bahamut is the Enkindling of Akmorn. Now, together with that, that's not the only thing that's clunky about Bahamut. You also need to make sure that you use 2 instant casts at the end of the Bahamut window, because the auto attacks of Bahamut, basically you need to give him enough time to execute those auto attacks. And if you do not give him 2 instant casts at the end of his summon window, the final auto attack could be ghosted. So that's another thing that kinda is meh, because you need to basically save 3 or 4 instant casts going into Bahamut. 1 to execute the first Akmorn, a second for the second Akmorn, and then a third to finish off the final window if you want to delay that second Akmorn, that is. Because usually you use 4 instant casts, 1 for the first Akmorn, second for the second Akmorn, and then 3 and 4 are at the end of the summoning window. So that's kind of like how you usually do your off GCDs there. So you either need to save 4 Ruin 4 stacks, or you need to save 3 Ruin 4 stacks and a Swift cast. And otherwise you have to resort to using a Ruin 2, which the entire Summoner kit right now is basically focused around, if you optimize it enough, that you will never really have to use Ruin 2 unless you really need to just have a lot of movement available to you or something like that, and you don't have Eggy Assault and you don't have your trances ready and that kind of stuff. Now, the reason why I would like to see this kind of changed, and this is kind of a mixed feeling of me as well, because right now the way Bahamut feels is it makes it feel different from the Phoenix summon. You have Bahamut who comes after the trance, and then you have to like save resources in order to use it correctly, and then the Phoenix goes together with the trance where you get those specific Phoenix GCDs. So it makes it feel different, and then the whole 2-minute rotation kind of feels like its own 2-minute stuff, rather than having a 1-minute section where you have your Bahamut, 1-minute section where you have your Phoenix kind of thing, or your trance, so that the trances still feel different, and that is a good thing about it. But on the other hand, if they would have made it so that Bahamut comes together with the Dreadwyrm trance, it would make a lot more sense, because then they could also give it some Bahamut specific GCDs, for example, other than just the Enkindle, kind of like how you have the Fountain of Fire and stuff like that for Phoenix. So it could make it feel more involved, and then the Dreadwyrm trance itself would also gain more value because of that, because now all of a sudden the Dreadwyrm trance summons the Bahamut with you, and then you do your stuff together with Bahamut, thus enforcing more of that summoner feel. Because right now the way Bahamut is, you only control his auto attacks through your personal GCDs, not through Bahamut GCDs that we don't have at this point, like you do with your Phoenix. So I do think the way it currently is it flows well enough and it feels diverse enough for me to still like it. But when I think about it from a fantasy standpoint, like as a role-playing standpoint, I guess you could call it, I do think like it would be a lot cooler and a lot more fun if your Bahamut would come together with the Dreadwyrm trance, and then if the Dreadwyrm trance, like it does now, also give you those instant casts, it would mean that the use to instant cast at the end of the Bahamut summon doesn't affect you at all, because everything would be an instant cast because you are inside of that the Dreadwyrm trance. So that's kind of what I think about the current summoner. I do think it's pretty good. The Eggy Assault's ghosting from time to time, if you use it too close to a summon or something like that, can be a bit annoying, but on the other hand it is also easy to work around if you know about it. Then of course the Phoenix Triple Weave, kind of annoying. Bahamut needing 2 instant casts at the end of its summoning window, also a bit annoying, but it does make it so that if you research enough and you practice enough on the job, you're going to know when you need to hold certain resources and that kind of stuff towards certain specific parts in the rotation, which just make it feel very rewarding to play when you do pull it up. It's also one of the reasons why I enjoyed Machinist so much back in Stormblood. I played it a lot in Stormblood, and mainly because there was some clunk to the job, but when you executed the clunk, you got rewarded with DPS, and Summoner right now feels a little bit like that as well. Yes, I would like to see some changes, especially when it comes to the Bahamut summon or something like that, but I do think that the way it is right now is still very fun to play. So those are kind of my opinions on Summoner, kind of my thoughts on the job as well. Currently I think it is in a pretty good spot, not only in a raiding scenario from like a DPS standpoint, utility standpoint, that kind of stuff, but also from the way that it plays. It is a lot of fun, a little bit clunky, but when you can execute the clunk, you are rewarded with a hell of a lot of DPS as well. So that's gonna be it for me. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.